pressing on President Donald Trump's threat to stop sending US funds to the World Health Organization, claiming that the international body missed the call on the coronavirus pandemic. Mr. Trump claimed that the WHO had called it wrong on the virus and that the organization was very China-centric in its approach.
We pay for a majority, a biggest portion of their money. And they actually criticized and disagreed with my travel ban at the time I did it. They missed the call. They could have called it months earlier. They would have known. And they should have known. And they probably did know. So we'll be looking into that very carefully. And we're going to put a hold on money spent to the WHO. We're going to put a very powerful hold on it.
Well, the President's comments have drawn this response today from the Director General of the World Health Organization.
The focus of all political parties should be to save their people. Please don't politicize this virus. It exploits the differences you have at the national level. If you want to be exploited, and if you want to have many more body bags, then you do it. If you don't want many more body bags, then you refrain from politicizing it.
Well, joining us now from Vancouver is Professor Kelly Lee from the Faculty of Health Sciences at Simon Fraser University, who co-established the WHO Collaborating Centre on Global Change and Health and is currently researching compliance by countries with the WHO international health regulations during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, very good evening to you, Professor Kelly Lee. Thanks so much for talking to us. So, really sharp criticism from President Trump directed at the WHO, saying amongst other things that they've been wrong about a lot of things, saying that he's considering withdrawing US funding in their direction. Does this attack on the organisation surprise you?
Well, these comments are really frustrating to hear, but perhaps not surprising from an administration that's shown itself to be really no fan of multilateralism. They're no fan of the UN system, I guess. And so what we see in this case are comments that are, I guess, par for the course.
So let's take a look at some of the criticism, though. President Trump has said that the WHO has been China-centric, and it's a criticism that others have also levelled at the organisation in recent weeks, haven't they? For example, Taiwanese officials say the WHO ignored some of their early warnings about the virus. They say because China refuses to allow Taiwan to become a member. And also some critics say that the WHO was too quick to back China's claims early on in January about person-to-person transmission not being proven. Do you think any of those criticisms there are valid?
Well, we'll find out in due course. It's hard to say at this moment. There's a lot of blame game going on. I would say that some of these criticisms so far tell us that many people do not understand the limited authority of WHO and the limited resources it has. So importantly, it's important to remember that WHO is not a Department of Health or a Center for Disease Control writ large. It is an organization that is a creature of its member states. So those member states have tightly constrained what WHO can do, and it's funded it accordingly. So that's really important when you're trying to, I guess, what you're expecting from WHO to do, you have to recognize what it was created to do. But the second thing is that it shows that we really all want a stronger WHO and not a weaker one, that we need an organization that can respond effectively to public health emergencies like COVID-19. And that the current system that we have in place at the moment is really underfunded. And we've been woefully inadequate in terms of giving it the resources, giving it the authority it needs to act accordingly.
And you say, obviously, that part of its job, if you like, is responding effectively to public health emergencies. What about the decision to declare a pandemic or an epidemic at an earlier point, a public health emergency, the decision of when you say that it is very serious? Do you think that the WHO got that right and declared it at the right time?
I know that there's been a lot of discussion about that and a lot of disagreement. I've gone on record and said that I didn't think the timing was wrong. It was, could have been a week earlier possibly, but the timing was not wrong based on the information that WHO had at the time. And it's been an evolving situation. So WHO has done what it says on the tin. It's simply an organization that collects epidemic intelligence, and then it alerts countries and says that there is an issue of concern that countries need to respond to. And they will issue guidelines, recommendations on what governments should do. And sometimes governments who don't have the capacity will get support from WHO in terms of mobilized resources. It's done all of these things. The leaders of WHO have gone on press conferences every day to keep everybody up to date. And so we see this happening, but is that enough? This is what we should be asking ourselves. Have we given WHO enough authority and mandate in a situation such as this? And I think questions should be asked about that, not whether WHO has fulfilled its existing mandate.
And explain to us a bit more about why you think that's important, why it is important to have a global body looking at a virus such as this.
Well, what I've been teaching my students here at SFU is that we're in a position where we've created a world where we're incredibly interconnected. Countries are now, in a system where we are all bound together globally. But what we've done is enabled markets to integrate, but we haven't created the institutions that monitor, regulate, and perhaps mitigate some of the risks that arise when you have an interconnected world. And so what we need to do is invest in institutions like WHO that can manage those risks. So we have a bit of an imbalanced globalization process going on over the past few decades. So rather than getting rid of WHO and making us even more at risk, what we need to do is invest much more heavily in the kind of infrastructure that will keep us all safe in case, and probably will be, another pandemic comes along in the future.
So with Donald Trump threatening to withdraw US funding, what kind of impact do you think that could potentially have? To what extent do they put money into the WHO?
The WHO is funded by two sources. There's the assessed contributions, which all countries pay into as member states of WHO. That's not negotiable. And that's based on a country's population and its wealth, its gross domestic product. So yes, the US does pay more than other countries because it's the wealthiest country in the world. Other countries may step up in future as they become wealthier. So WHO needs to receive those resources. What you have here is if you have a withdrawal of the largest contributor, you're having an even weaker WHO, which actually is counterproductive. And what I'm seeing here happening is not, a beef with WHO. I think it's really a deflection from how the U.S. administration has dealt with this crisis domestically. So the Obama administration set up a whole infrastructure in the National Security Council and the Department of Homeland Security and in CDC to monitor epidemics and respond to them, have a command group that coordinates. So the Trump administration actually dismantled all of this in 2018. And so it finds itself in a situation where coordination is a real problem because this infrastructure has been dismantled. So, of course, you're looking around and, there's an election coming up. I think there's an issue here about who really is, to blame for what's happening in the U.S. and finding, a scapegoat or a fall guy to take that rap.
Okay, very interesting to get your take on it. Professor Kelly Lee, thanks very much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
It's taken 76 days, but the Chinese city of Wuhan is open again. Quarantine restrictions have largely been lifted, and trains and flights are once again carrying people freely from the city where the coronavirus outbreak began. But officials warn that the threat of further infections is not over, and they'll be watching closely. Tom Cheshire reports on the end of the lockdown.
For 11 weeks, these roads had led to nowhere, blocked off, cut off from the rest of the world. Now people can make their way out for the first time. A city finally reconnected to its country. Nearly 100 trains have sat idle the whole while. In the morning, they started moving again.
We were too excited to fall asleep last night. I was looking forward to the lockdown being lifted very much. I set up an alert to remind myself. I was very happy.
And planes took to the sky.
21号开始没出门。
I haven't been out since January the 21st. This is the first time I left the house today. Now I'm going back home to meet my parents.
对。
Do they miss you?
你看你傻，你不要再说了，在这哭了。
Of course. Don't